Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for virtual happy hour again this evening. I'm Raina from Garden District Bookshop. This evening, I have a very special guest to me. I got a copy of Leigh's book, Leigh Wright's book, in the bookstore a couple of weeks ago. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, she would be perfect for virtual happy hour. I'm going to tell you, she's a documentarian, she's an author, she's an explorer. I'm just going to read a couple things from her website because seriously, she's a member of the Explorers Club, an international fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, a stunt woman, and a self-defense instructor. So we can talk about anything you can come up with this evening. And I'm going to click the button here and bring her on so you guys can talk to her too. Hi, Leigh.
Hi, how's it going?
Very good. How are you this evening?
I'm good. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
I just had to read part of the stuff off of your website, just straight off the website, because I was reading it and I'm like, oh, she's part of a documentary. She's got this book. She's a stunt woman.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
I know it's always kind of like the skills that are associated with all of those are, kind of in the same little orbit, but a lot of times those job titles don't really fit together. But yeah, I seem to make it work, at least for now.
Well, so I imagine, like, after I thought about it, I'm like, okay, so you do need self-defense and to be able to be like self-reliant and like figure out life situations if you're exploring and you're traveling all the time and everything. So maybe a stunt woman isn't quite so far.
No, well, and actually that. So how I ended up becoming a self-defense instructor anyway is through traveling all the time. I've been traveling anyway from, whenever I could. My parents would just throw me in the truck with like one of my aunts or anything, and they would drive me down to the beach, and I would just go along with it, and it would be fun. And then once I ended up moving to New Orleans, being an adult, having my own money, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and I'm going to travel by myself. So I would go on all these trips, like to Asia or, Central America, anywhere like that. And I would just be by myself, and which is fun and great. But at the same time, as I started to get a little bit older, I was like, this could also be a little dangerous, and I love walking around the French Quarter at night also by myself. Again, I know that's not the safest thing in the world to do, but it was very like therapeutic for me. I just love people watching. I love to go do that. So I found a self-defense gym here, and I started it, and I loved it, and I was fairly good at it. And so they asked me to be an instructor, and then, how one thing kind of turns into the next, and then here I am.
I do. That's how I got here, literally. That's exactly what happened. One day I was just selling a book here and there, and the next day I'm hosting virtual happy hour for the last 5 months. Who knew?
See, that's a good tumbleweed effect then.
It's good. I'm enjoying it. Yeah, I love it. Okay, Tiffany has a question. What brought you to New Orleans?
Great question, Tiffany. I actually did mention it a little bit in my book. It was more or less like a joke that I inserted at the end of one of the chapters. But I moved here during my college graduation, the tornadoes actually went through Tuscaloosa and Alabama and all those states and canceled graduation. So as I like to joke, I had already started seeing who is now my wife at the time. And so when I skipped out on graduation weekend and I came down for Jazz Fest and to see her. So like many New Orleanian transplants, I moved here for Jazz Fest and a lady.
Love it. Yes. Those are like the trifecta is like,
yeah,
is like the music,
it's
the general, like, yep, exactly.
That's everything perfect. In the air. It's kind of like, and again, not to just keep always going back to my book, but like, because I even wrote this book a year ago, and that's how long it takes for it to actually get published. But as I say that too, Terrence Osborne's wife, who I interviewed, Stephanie, she was great. She's a phenomenal lady and like a meditation guide. But she loves springtime as well. Like when she talks about springtime, she gets giddy almost and thinks about all the crawfish and the food and like the sweets. And like, because it's like that time of year where all of a sudden people come back out and you're like, music is in the streets and you're drinking in the sunshine. And yeah, springtime in New Orleans is definitely one of my favorites.
really, like, fall and spring in New Orleans are really both magical times because it's been so hot over the summer, and as it really starts to cool off, you have that same like sort of reawakening of the city where you hear music just, and you hadn't for a couple of months really, unless it was a very organized sort of thing. You didn't really hear just people being out on the stoop playing music, and then all of a sudden it cools off and there's music coming from somewhere down there, and then there's music coming from somewhere over here. And even with COVID now, the city's starting to, I hear that too.
Blossom up just a little bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Not as much, I feel like, as maybe last year or hopefully next year, but yeah, you have that. You can hear it start to waken, and spring is similar where it's been cold. And I know for people from up north, it is not as cold. We shouldn't be complaining. But if you're from the south, it is cold. And then it starts to warm up just a little bit in the spring, and everything starts to bloom, and you get that same sort of effect where there's music coming from everywhere and people are out and about again, and you can go take these long walks and you're not like either freezing or sweating all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Even during all of COVID and everything, like when we would go up to the bayou and there was like a 4-piece string band just playing in the grass, and there are all these people littered about, like socially distanced, but they still wanted to be outside. And again, mentioning the book, it's just another lady who I interviewed, Kim, she lives in Carrollton, and she loves New Orleans because she was like, we don't live inside of our homes. Like, we don't live inside of our walls. We're always outside. We're always talking to our neighbors, our friends, at the store, at the next festival, just like literally when we're on the bayou, like anything, you're going to meet your next best friend. So that's another reason why I kind of really enjoyed writing this book. And again, seeing so many similarities and like why New Orleanians get out and like truly love living here. So
yeah, I moved here from Florida, and in Florida you get the cinder block houses and these great floor plans, and all these open floor plans and everything, these huge rooms. And I moved here, and by comparison, the house I live in is small. It fits all the people just fine, right? But it's small. I know my mom, my sister come to visit. She's like, "Oh, this is so cute," like that type of thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's different here. Like there, you have your, quarter acre of land, and that's your space. And then that's where you live there, and you get your car and you drive to somewhere else, and you might do something there, and then you drive back and you go in home. And here it's like, I sit out on the stoop. I talk to my neighbors. I know my neighbors. I lived in different places for 20 some years in Florida. And I only knew neighbors when I was very little, and there were kids on the street, and you could play. And those were the only neighbors I ever knew. When I moved out in apartments, I'd pass these people and you'd never know who they are.
Right. I mean, I think New Orleans is more or less like, I say, like a caricature of what a good life actually is. And that's why, with the good and the bad of everything that we encounter living here, it's because so many people have that good life, that to people outside, they see all the things that make this place a little bit harder to live in, the potholes, sometimes the city government oversight, all these kind of things. And people here are just like, no, but I don't think you understand, unless you're here day to day and you can actually get into like the grout of everything, then you actually understand that's like where the good bits are. So,
exactly.
But yeah, I see that you're looking over at the comments.
Yeah.
I'd love to go into the next question.
Oh, okay. Let's go back up to, where's your favorite place to travel? So
it's a characteristic of where I like to travel are places that I like to get lost in. I've always had a fascination with people who can just land in a place and then find their way around, get lost a little bit. So I've traveled a lot, 2 different trips and stuff to Southeast Asia, when going to like Thailand, Myanmar, and Cambodia. And in Cambodia, it was very nice because I actually went on a 2-week raft expedition going down. So again, like going into these places that I definitely have never seen, like a lot of people of European descent had never seen since the French colonizers in like the mid 1800s. So it was those places are very nice. I also have really enjoyed Europe, even though it's, very well planned out and mapped, and people obviously live there and have lived there for hundreds and thousands of years. To me, it's just like all the different streets and nooks and crannies that I'm going to get lost in. So that's kind of like my favorite place, is just plopping down somewhere that I have absolutely no idea how I would get home and then finding my way back.
I completely understand that. And you can do that even in towns. Like, you don't have to be so far out of your element.
Yeah.
You just have to be willing to not know where you're going.
Right.
And that's, that's a lot of fun. You go to a different town, even if they speak English, it's in America, and you just drive into the downtown, drop your car, and get out and start walking around. I don't know where I'm going. And asking people for recommendations too. You find a coffee shop, you go in, you get a coffee, go, hey, do you guys have an indie bookstore here? Or do you have, where's a good park? Like, I have a son, he's this old. Is there a good park around here? Because that recommendation is going to be way better than anything else. And I'm like, oh, can we walk there? And then, oh yeah, it's 6 blocks this way. And sometimes they're like, walk. And I'm like, nah, I got this, because I'm from a city where we walk all the time. So 6 blocks is good. I got that.
I'm okay with. Yeah.
Right. But then, it's sort of like allowing yourself to
I'm completely the bumbling American idiot who I have yet to ever grasp a second language. I am good at directions and I'm pretty friendly, so that gets me by in a lot of situations. But yeah, I mean, I'm literally like that comical jester that people have to help along the way. But that's the thing, is like, I'm at least willing to have people help me. I'm not sitting there just trying to find like my next A to B point or anything. Even when I was in Cambodia and we were staying in a village, and I was trying to buy just 2 single beers from the locals, and they kept saying the number, and I was like, no, I know that's $12, and that's not even how much beers cost in New Orleans, so I know that's not right.
That's not right.
And so it turns out they thought that I was trying to buy these 2 cases of beer, and so I was like, nobody spoke anything until we were literally drawing everything on the ground to figure it out. And then it was probably the most mediocre lukewarm beer that I've had afterwards once I finally got it.
Obviously, but because the memory of the whole experience is better than the beer's ever going to taste.
Exactly.
So Kyle has a question. What is your favorite scary movie?
Ooh, okay. So typically, great question, Kyle. Typically, I am not into scary movies. I like to attribute it to my parents. I'm the youngest. And they took all of the kids to Universal, probably when I was too little, and made me see the stage reenactment of Psycho. And I never really recovered from that until probably my mid-teens. So I try to stay away from a lot of horror movies. However, I recently have enjoyed The Autopsy of Jane Doe. That was one that was a real thriller. I like thrillers. I don't really like scary movies. I like the first season of American Horror Story, not the second season. Like, once you get into like a lot of like gruesome torture and like sewing people's limbs on and stuff, like that's kind of where you yeah, I'm in the Alfred Hitchcock like psychological thriller phase of things. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite horror movies is the Lifeboat, those Hitchcock ones where it's all in your head. Like, mean, yes, they're stuck on this lifeboat, but the whole thing is all in their head. And what is Rear Window is the same, where he's looking out the window and just basically spying on his neighbors this whole time and inventing this whole scenario
in his head. And like, that's the thing, is because you can get scared by things popping out at you and everything like that. And like, you can be afraid of the dark. But then, like, yeah, if you're sitting there in traffic one day on the way to work and all of a sudden that movie creeps back into your head and you're just like, oh, man, I wonder if I'm doing this to myself. Like, those like great writing and like great directors who actually get that emotion from, a piece of paper or an idea in their head and are somehow able to transfuse it and then put it into an audience. Like, that's pretty incredible. And that's why he's one of the great names.
Exactly. I'll tell you another author an author who does that. Obviously, okay, my son is reading a Stephen King book right now. He's just turned 13. Well, he's 13 and that's happening. So I'm very excited to hear how that works on his head, and a little bit afraid that that's not gonna, like, he's gonna have one of those Psycho type stories. He's a little older though. He's 13.
Yeah, no, I was like the youngest, and so I think my brother was probably 13, and I was probably like 9. So like no reason to be taking me, and because like then after that, personal inside Leigh story is because like after watching Psycho, and like I was always a voracious reader, like reading all like the Harry Potters or like anything from a tiny age, and I would just take baths. So I was like this little 9-year-old kid with a huge 400-page Harry Potter book, but I would only take a bath. And so my mom would have to come up there and like tell me to like get out of the bath and stuff. But I would just like be reading, and I was like, this is safer. It doesn't have a shower curtain. This is fine.
Oh my gosh. See, those are weird parenting things. Every time you do something, I go, is this going to be the thing? Is this going to be the one that like sits with him for the rest of his life? And he's like 30 something. He's like, I remember this one time.
And he tells you never know. Strangers, and they're like, huh, okay, interesting. Nice.
Yeah, you don't know until you get there, until 20 years from now. And he's like, Mom, I really wish you hadn't have done that one thing. I'm like, oh, damn. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm totally capable of taking showers and stuff now. Baths are not the only thing. I've somehow taken the curve, and now we're here. So
it's good to know. So there's a rehabilitation period of time, and then you will be able to take a shower again. That's good. It's good to know. Okay, let's see. Tiffany asks, how did you find or select the people in the book to interview?
So kind of drawing back, I was working in market research for a little bit. I already kind of had this idea in my head when I started to write these articles for Where You At. And I would just kind of find, honestly, like a lot of like family and friends that I knew around town who worked in the tourism industry. And that's kind of what it was focused on originally. But for the book, I took a lot of the work that I did with this market research company and took all that experience and training and then put it to this book. So I basically did a cross-reference of age, ethnicity, geographical location, like literally just where they were in the city, occupation, and stuff like that. And that's kind of how I zeroed in on the main categories. And then from there, I didn't want to write about anyone that I actually like know and could just talk to on a daily basis, because that would be extremely awkward. So I typically went to like a friend of a friend and maybe of another friend, So I always just kind of wanted those like little degrees of separation to where, hey, if I see them out and about, like they're not going to be like, oh, you're that author who wrote this scathing article about me. I don't think I did any of that. But I also definitely didn't want to just see the person day to day and we're like, hey, book. So that's kind of how it came about.
So how many people did you interview versus how many made it into the book?
Ooh, great question. I think I only had about out of 13 people that I ended up interviewing, I think probably like 10. It didn't really work out just because honestly, either of timing or, as I was explaining it a little bit more, people obviously are going to be put off, like they don't want to be written about, so it was much more about approaching people in this mindset of like, hey, I'm picking you because I think that you are, one, very articulate, that you have a lot of strong personal values and opinions that would come through. And for the fact that like, I obviously think you have a strong enough backbone to where you're going to be written about,
Right.
So.
Right. And that's, there's plenty of things where somebody asks you and then you go, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then like after you get into it, you're like, oh, maybe I don't actually want to be in a book. I was willing to like meet you for coffee and talk to you, but now it's like, oh, I'm going to be in a book. Maybe not.
Yeah. So, and actually a lot of times those people are the ones who ended up referencing me to somebody else who did end up working out. So, and again, that's kind of like just a way that I ended up meeting a lot more people in New Orleans. So now I have even a lot more, contacts that I can like see out and about when we're at the next festival and whatnot.
Exactly. Kate asks, how do you think people can be responsible tourists in New Orleans in restaurants and bars, especially during COVID? That is an excellent question. We're wondering that not only like for ourselves as locals, how can we be responsible, but also like how can we go anywhere and because we were talking about traveling, and when I go, I try and go out of my way to go to local places and see, like I'm not doing the McDonald's drive-through, when I'm visiting places, but how do you do that? And
yeah, I think one of the new terminologies that you might see in the coming years, like, so typically people don't call, tourists. They'll call them, in the industry, they'll call them visitors. They'll call them guests, anything like hospitality wise. But if you're looking at high level tourism marketers who are actually talking about what people should do, they're starting to call them temporary citizens. So that's essentially like what you're going to be when you land in a place. And so historically, a lot of times, people rely on tourism money. So, you see it here. It's like, hey, why would you shut down bars and to-go drinks if you're not going to be able to, break up clusters that are happening on Bourbon Street? It's like you are pandering to people who are here because you're like, you know what, this is our main industry right now. We need the money. And you're kind of bending the rules just a little bit just to let these people come and spend their money. And I think now, and COVID has brought about a good time to where we can look at that again. And so businesses and citizens who are just out and about in general can kind of like muster up the courage and say like, no, hey, these are our rules. These are our guidelines. Like, this is how we're living here in the city, and you have to as well. So when you come here, you can't just litter all the time during a parade and think that it's like totally fine or anything. Like people are going to be out and about and doing that, but because we're also, helping on other ends to clean up the trash. When you're here and you're going out to bars and whatnot, don't be that person who's like, well, I don't have to wear a mask when I'm home, so I don't have to wear a mask here, So it's kind of like, again, making sure that we're a good host, knowing that like, these are our rules, these are our kind of like parameters, and then making those people kind of understand that this is the best way that you can visit here.
Yeah, and I mean, those are good rules for almost anywhere you go visit. When you go, when in Rome, right? So when you go somewhere else, you have to think about what are the customs here and what are the rules here and how can I fit into this city or this country or something.
Exactly. I mean, we just actually went to Seattle just to get away. I mean, I felt very cooped up, as everyone has. And so we went, and even as we were walking along, like in downtown, and, we still cross the street when there are other people, like we don't try to go around people a lot, but we did notice a severe difference here. Most people don't wear a mask if you're just walking by yourself. Like if you're walking by yourself, you might not have a mask on. You might put it on when you go into a place. I'm telling you, everyone in Seattle had a mask on at every point that they stepped out of their room, hotel room, house, wherever. I mean, it kind of made me feel bad because I was like, I thought I was doing a very good job of this COVID thing. And then all of a sudden I go and, I mean, somebody is a block down the road and they're just casually wearing their mask just to kind of like walk their dog, So I think that's when we noticed, and we were like, okay, well, we'll obviously wear our mask all the time. So.
Right. You're going to do that there, and then you're going to rethink it when you come home. You're like, oh, maybe I should.
Right. Yeah, what do they know that I don't know right now?
Right?
To help me out. So,
because as a whole, we are doing a good job here. But yeah, I take a mask with me. I like always have a mask, even if I'm just going for a walk, because you never know. Maybe you want to go in somewhere, or maybe someone stops to talk to you, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to put a mask on. But I'll pass people. You pass them, you go to the edges of the sidewalk, but you still just sort of.
I know now I kind of feel like we're losing a little bit of that Southern hospitality where normally you can like look and wave and smile and do your thing, and now we just kind of walk in opposite directions or across the street or do whatnot. So those are kind of the mannerisms and the social cues that I hope will stick around when COVID eventually, this acute solution to all this kind of stuff, like eventually fades away. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I've definitely thought a lot more about how what I do with my eyes, like
rising everywhere.
Yeah, like where I'm looking, like if can I smile with my eyes? Can I say hi with my eyes? Like, because you do. You can't like the little smile or something doesn't read through the mask, obviously.
Right.
It's weird. Kate asks, "What's your favorite book and why?"
Ooh, that's tough. I feel like when I like wake up at midnight by myself and I start just rambling in my head, I would have thought about the answer to that question. But now that I'm put on the spot, that's just very, very difficult.
Okay. You want me to go first? I'll go first.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. So I have two favorite books that I always say are my favorite books of all time. One is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston.
Oh, that's a good one.
I said I was born and raised in Florida, and that takes place in Florida, and I could see the places she was talking about in that book, and then it made me look at them very differently because I'm growing up as a middle class white girl, and I'm reading this, and I'm like, wow, and these towns, like I could piece them together, like they're fake towns in the book, but I based on where they're related to other places, like I know where that is, and it really sat with me. And of course it's an amazing book. So that stays one of my favorites. And then on a completely different note, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was an
Oh.
that was my I was like, I think I was like 14 when I first read that. And, another friend had recommended it, and he's like 14, 15. And I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is the most hilarious, highbrow thing I've ever read in my life. I loved every minute of it. And I can't get away from it. It just will always be, it'll be one of those two books that come out of my mouth. And I can name 50, 100 other amazing books I've read, but it'll be those two.
Those two? I'm
No
like
matter
trying to look back at my bookshelf in general. I would have to say, that was bad to look back at my bookshelf, because then I just think about all these books that have been really good throughout. So I would have to say, in general, the book The Lost City of Z. Really, I read that I think when I was from junior high, entering high school, and that was like my severe explorer phase, which again I realize even now at the time it was a very like colonialistic explorer timeline that I was reading about, but that's kind of what kicked off all this other stuff about just like appreciating other cultures and trying to understand, like, again, when you go and like how do you bring information back to even share or teach others, because that's always been like a big kind of North Star for my life, is basically like how you can educate others like through entertainment. Like I was never a great school student at all, but I thoroughly enjoyed learning. So it was kind of one of those like, how do you make these like real life experiences that I'm having accessible or even applicable to others? So I think that might be one of my like truly great books. Although a book I've been thinking about recently a lot, and actually a lot of times, if no one's read it, is The Fish That Ate the Whale. I go back to this book maybe like once a year or every 2 years, and it's about an immigrant who was from, moved to Alabama, where I'm from, and then came to New Orleans and ended up building like the largest banana empire, and even try to overthrow a Nicaraguan government from Lake Pontchartrain. It's an insane book. So that's, again, another little nerdy book to go read.
That is a great book. And if you're looking for any like a New Orleans themed book too, that's like I said, he moves to New Orleans, and it's crazy pants, but it's so entertaining and so like so New Orleans in a way. Like these characters, and people seem like they're caricatures of themselves, but no,
right?
they're real, and that's really what they say and do and things like that.
Right.
I often sell the Confederacy of Dunces that way. I'm like, look, you're gonna read this and you're gonna think people don't do that. That's crazy. I'm like, no, these people are real. They exist. Like it's like that, in a lot of different ways here in New Orleans. Great way.
And that's the whole thing. And to also segue, Stephen Matthews over in the comments is saying like, anyone in particular you've met in writing your book that you'd put in the unforgettable character category, and which is kind of difficult, just because I liked so many of them, since I broke it down into chapters per person. Every time I would write a chapter, I was like, man, that was a great chapter. And, and like, just because like I really enjoyed, like, it would remind me of like talking to that person and like connecting with them. I really enjoyed Adrienne, the bartender, just because her attitude is very transparent of what it feels like to be on the other side of the well. Like people come in and you're rowdy. You're, again, not being a good guest, not being a good temporary citizen, trying to think that you can just buy your way or like coerce your way around. And she sets her hard boundaries, which I appreciate. Kim, the other one that I've mentioned before, I really liked her chapter just because that resonated with me a lot. I kind of changed this quote a little bit when I published the book, but basically she was like, you don't move to New York. Like when you go to New York, people go to New York thinking that, they're going to be a star or whatever. And it sometimes doesn't happen, but people come to New Orleans and that stuff really happens. Like you don't come to New Orleans and think like, oh, hey, I'm going to be the next Dr. John. You come to New Orleans because you're going to smoke a joint with Dr. John. Like that's kind of like the way it ends up. And so she was a really good character and chapter to read and write about. And then, I'm just trying to think of like all the different all the different ones were really, really good. Because again, Crystal, the one who was the general manager over at Barely Legal, like she had another great perspective of like honestly just how hard it is to work in the service industry when you're having to bend over backwards for people because your bosses, obviously need that profit and everything, and people can be like pretty unruly, and so you have to set some hard boundaries that they aren't going to appreciate, and you're going to get a bad rap, but like that's just the way life is.
Right. Your options are, set the boundary or you get walked all over one way or the other. So,
right.
Because people, if you back up, they're going to take a step forward.
Oh, no. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And that's pretty much no matter what industry you're in or, personal life, public life, business life, all of that. Make sure you know where your line is. Stick to it. In the bookstore, we've got quite a few more tourists coming back into the bookstore. And so far I haven't had much of a problem like with people wearing masks or anything. But you do see that sort of tourist mentality you were talking about earlier where when you're here, you've gone away for a weekend and you don't want to have to deal with it. So when you say, I need you to put your mask on, if you come in the building, they do. But the tourists are the ones who don't already have one, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like or they have a mask, but they're going to see if they can go in this building and not wear it, and that's definitely the locals are like, I have to wear a mask.
Are they tourists from like a more regional vicinity, or are they like actually becoming, from different states or even different countries? Or is the circle kind of getting broader and broader?
I definitely have not heard anybody from another country yet.
Right.
But most of them still are regional. They're driving in as a way, kind of like you were talking about going to Seattle, where they've been home, they've been staying inside or doing the best they can. And they're like, okay, we've got to go somewhere, but they don't want to get on a plane. They don't want to do certain things. So they're like, okay, let's just drive to New Orleans for a long weekend and do that. Is the majority of them. Some of them have, canceled trips earlier. I was talking to a couple who had canceled a trip. They were supposed to come like in April or something, and they had to cancel it and then decided that now was okay. And they were from Michigan. So they definitely flew in to do that. But that's more rare. It's still pretty regional at this point.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I think it'll stay more regional in general moving forward from what we've seen, and that's kind of like catch-22 that you're in is like obviously New Orleanians at this stage we're ready for life to return to normal. We want the parades, we want the nights out and everything, and that just won't happen for a while. It's just that's kind of like a truth that we have to accept. Yeah. But those kind of travels, even where we can go and help our neighbors in Louisiana, going to like Lafayette or going to any of these smaller towns where you can go visit distilleries or like still being able to do stuff and keep the local economies going. I think it will be definitely very important moving forward in the next like 6 months to a year. But then also like extremely important in just learning that like, yeah, you don't have to spend all this crazy money to go to like Cancun or whatnot to get like a special vacation. Like you can literally get lost, like you said earlier, like in your backyard. You can go and do this, and it's going to help us like be safer and more hygienic as like a more like cohesive type of standards are set. I think so. So yeah, I mean, I would see a lot more like Floridians and Texans and everybody coming in, and as well, we should be going and doing the same. So,
yeah, I mean, that's what I've seen, and I think that would be great. Like, there's so many places just in Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, some places that you can get to within 4 or 5 hour drive to see that you can keep yourself busy for quite a long time.
Yeah, that we've honestly probably flown over many times trying to go somewhere else more exciting. And then now we're just kind of like, oh yeah, now that I've been locked in my house for 6 months, this is fantastic to go,
all of a sudden that little podunk town that you drove right by a billion times looks really appealing. They have a different park and a different restaurant, a different thing to look at. Yeah, exactly. So Tiffany is asking if you have any ideas or plans for a second book?
Yeah, I do, honestly. it's kind of crazy. Like, you know, as somebody who always has another idea or another concept that they want to get out, I typically have trouble focusing on just one. I always have a lot of irons in the fire. But for my second book, at least for this, and how I pitched it was, and why I called it just Local Life New Orleans, is because I want to do a whole series of different locations. So my next one will still be in like a southern region. I'm about to kind of go back to Pelican's editor with this idea and stuff soon. But it's another region here, you know, in the South and Southeast that has seen like a total upheaval even since COVID started. So when I wrote this first book, you know, pre-COVID, again, I think a lot of the themes still resonate after COVID. A lot of people talk about, you know, Black culture appropriation, the fragility of service industry workers' livelihoods, Airbnb, short-term rentals, like all that kind of stuff is still relevant. But now COVID has kind of like layered on that little like extra slice. And so, yeah, so this next region that I'm looking at kind of had this thing where all these people from up north ended up coming down and purchasing a lot of real estate because all of a sudden they got stuck up for 4 or 5 months in their same little apartments, and they went stir crazy. And with their amount of money, they can come down here to a cheaper real estate and buy their, what I'm going to call quarantine homes. So
that is really interesting.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, wasn't planning on COVID to help out with some themes for my second book, but it certainly did. So.
Yeah. Well, and it's a weird thing because you've got that happening, but then also these places that were Airbnbs and there's not as many people traveling, and you've got that happening, are now going on to the market as rentals. I mean, just this is anecdotal. I have no facts on this, but just from me walking around and seeing, I mean, there's signs all over the place and they keep popping up for sale, but also for rent. Places I know that were Airbnbs last year, for example, are now like for rent signs. And I'm just wondering if that's, you know, they took this hit, they held on, they're trying to hold on for a few months and it's not coming back fast enough. So they're just, you know, they're trying to put it back on the market as a rental, as a longer term rental, which is good. I mean, that could be a silver lining to this. I don't know how long it'll last.
Yeah, I'm just interested in, because same thing. I've been just watching it in general, because when you see tourists, you know, people come down here, visitors come down here, and they're in the French Quarter, and you're just kind of, especially, you know, when we were in phase 1 and we were stuck in phase 2 forever, and you're just like, what are you doing? Like, honestly, like, what are you doing here? Because even as a local, I'm finding it difficult to find places that are open or consistent or serving food or not serving, you know, like I didn't even know anything. But so with the Airbnbs, like I've noticed that too, like a couple of places going for rent. And so, so now you see all these places that are like filled with furniture, you know, are people renting them like fully furnished? Are they now having to just store all this stuff? Yeah. It kind of becomes how Airbnb actually is, which is a business, not essentially what they always tout it as, which is a cultural exchange. So,
right.
Yeah.
So Kyle has a great question. Here we go. I'm going to try and do my best interview. So Leigh, now that you're famous, how do you feel?
Well, you know, I've asked myself this. And I would like to say that everyone is a celebrity in their own right. So Kyle, you too, in your own right, are famous and a celebrity.
Congratulations, Kyle. Does it feel different now? Do you feel different now? You have a book.
No, it just feels like a great weight has lifted off. Honestly, and that's what I kept telling people. Even last week when I was doing something, you know, I still am, like, I still have people who I aspire to be or to talk to or anything else like that. But I think even from when I first graduated college and everything, like I'm a big nerd. And so I had this huge list that was like, what are your life goals? You know, and be an author was one of them. And so, you know, in my own little right, like, no matter how big or little the book is and like whatnot, because I can sit here and kind of like critique it as many creators do. It's like, no, like I actually made this goal and I accomplished it. And since it came about in the time of COVID, it kind of took a little wind out of the sails for a time.
Yeah.
But now I can like write much more freely. It's like been this kind of a freeing effect to where I sit down and I'm like, you know what? I can actually just really enjoy this now even more than I was enjoying it because I'm a published author. So that was like my big chip on my shoulder that's now gone. And so, yeah, so I kind of thoroughly appreciate it more now than I even did when I got signed on. So
I love it. I love it. You've checked the box. So everything after this is just gravy. So the stress is off. The pressure's off. You can just let it go, write it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like I said, I always have a lot of irons in the fire. So, I mean, there's definitely other projects of other varieties always happening. So, you know, those will be my next little mountains to climb. But that's the whole thing. Is like once you get one mountain behind you, then you're like, oh yeah, I can do this. This will be fun, and it can actually be more fun, I think, along the way. So yeah.
So what made you like? What appeals to you about tourism specifically? And because you approach it really interestingly, you're not like, here's a bunch of charts and how you can get more people from your city and like that. You hear that all the time. It's been marketing people and that's what they do. But you're approaching it from much more like human aspect. Like are people affected? How does it, how does it all work together?
Well, thank you. First off, like I'm glad that kind of came across because for a really long time, I've been trying to get this message kind of rolling and spitballing and everything. And so I think when I first moved to New Orleans and got out of the restaurant industry, I ended up in hospitality marketing. So I understood all the back end of it at the same time that I was taking my own personal journeys throughout places. So again, as like a middle-class white girl who's traveling around and stuff, my experience is so different than other people who travel. And it's so different. Honestly, when I went to Myanmar, and I think this was like the year after Myanmar opened back up to Western tourists. And I was kind of like traveling and seeing just like how they lived. And you couldn't even book a hotel or lodging from outside of the country. You had to wait until you were inside the country until you could actually book something. So it was just like an entirely new world to me. And it was those kind of things where I was just like, I have such a privilege of being able to come over here and do this and see this, and it's crazy, and I want other people to know about it. But it's also affecting these locals in so many nuanced ways that people might not stop and consider. So even in New Orleans, same as Myanmar, it's like, hey, there's tourism dollars, perfect, it helps the economy. And then you start doing a little bit of digging, and then you're like, oh, actually only $1 out of every 100 typically stays in a local economy. So even with cruise ships that come and stay in New Orleans, like they don't pay taxes here. They pay taxes to international countries where they actually have their like flag's origin. So like you start to kind of see all this stuff, but again, it's very boring. And so for somebody who did not do very well in school, charts and data and stuff are necessary, but I don't think that that's a huge driver for people in mass to start paying attention and actually be like, oh yeah, like I need to travel better. I need to actually like consider the fact that when I go to this third world country, like it might not be accustomed to tip people, it might actually be seen as offensive, or I might actually need to tip, these people, but not the ones who were sitting on the street, just kind of like all these different things. So I think that's kind of where tourism really came about for me and was really interesting to me, was like that human and human interaction. And then, for a very long time when I was trying to write this book or even try to have people talk about it, like nobody here wants to talk about it because tourism is a huge moneymaker. And so why I wrote this book mainly is just so neighbors and friends and everybody else can start talking to each other and being like, hey, is this good for us? Like maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Who knows? Maybe it can just be tweaked just a little bit, or maybe we need to shift and pivot this way. And so I think that's kind of like a conversation that's missing. And I think more research into how people feel about tourism in New Orleans is definitely necessary.
So many times when you talk about tourism, it's either good or bad.
Right.
There's very little discussion about anything in between.
Right.
And as a city, New Orleans, we won't survive without tourism in any semblance of what we have ever been. We're not going to make it without it. So we can't just get rid of it. So we have to. All those conversations really do need to be had, because you have to. How do the locals live with it, and the tourists have a good time too? Like, I don't want to come here and dislike it because we built such rigid things.
Right.
That doesn't work either. Like, everybody.
And I think that's the best part about it, is that, people, like, I'm not, like, by writing this book, it's not, and I even put this in the introduction, it's not a way to say that tourism is bad. It's not even a way to say that, hey, the tourism system we have right now is completely broken. There's good and bad. But as tourism as a whole, it's fantastic, because you can, like, learn about other cultures. You can definitely, like, go and visit and see other things. But it's being able to differentiate, like, what type of guests that you are. Like, even if you go somewhere for fun, like go and just get drunk on a beach somewhere or whatnot, like, you can still be a good temporary citizen. Like, there's nothing preventing you from doing that, except maybe, your own ignorance. So, yeah.
I think also, like, educating people about how they spend their money and where they spend their money. Like you were saying, only $1 of $100 stays in the community, depending on. My lights just totally went out. So I'm gonna try and fix that. Weirdly enough, I don't know if I can do that.
I know. Well, hopefully,
it's not like being my house. Yay! Like, I'm in a temporary location for the last couple of weeks, and the lights here. They're all on, like, they're all hue lights. So you work them from an app in your phone, which I don't have on my phone. And the lights just went out, but they came back on. So that's good. I'm sorry. I got completely.
It's a good thing though that you probably do enjoy scary movies, and we're not terrified by that. Probably as I would have been.
I was mostly like, all right, I guess we're gonna do this in the dark. Here we go.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, but that's the crazy thing, and I think again, I hope more people kind of talk about, and then you talk with your either, like, city government, regional government, whatever, is like, there are definitely different ways of constructing tourism in general. Like, even how France did it, like, there's this whole study about how France, like, set up their tourism after World War II that was a great economic driver, because that's all that they had. But they limit the amount of people who go up into the Eiffel Tower every day. They do a great job of not just centering people just in Paris, but going out to, like, Burgundy, Champagne, like, other regions, like the south of France. Like, they try to get people to spread out. And so, again, if you read kind of the current events of what's all happening, like, now that COVID is here, like, people are definitely, like, looking for that space, and looking, I think, less for that kitschy term of, like, what's authentic, and maybe just kind of, like, setting aside your ego and just kind of being like, okay, this is the trip, this is the vacation, this is what we're doing, and it is what it is, because I'm going to follow along with these locals,
Absolutely. A lot of times it's as simple as not going to the Starbucks and going to the local coffee shop. It's as simple as something like that. And sometimes, and don't get me wrong, I've been in plenty of places that I'm like, you know what, not today. I just need to go to the McDonald's. I just need the Big Mac. I just need to not have to stress about what it is. But when you're there, you do that, and you go to more local places, and it sounds like, it's something somebody's heard. I know we're supposed to shop local. I hear that in the bookstore, and they're in a local indie bookstore. I know we're supposed to shop local. It's like, well, it's not like someone's forcing you. Like, you shouldn't feel like a burden that you bear. It's just, like, literally the difference between, how many dollars stay in the community, and, like, the types of businesses. Independent bookstores, we are working with the American Booksellers Association. There's a campaign going on right now that's basically like, what do you want your community to look like in 2021? Where you spend your money today will determine what your community looks like in 2021. Do you want a Starbucks on every corner? I keep using that, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Do you want that type of, those franchises on every corner? Do you want these local small mom and pop type places to survive. And if you do, that's where you spend your dollars, and not just at home. But when you go as a tourist to any destination and you look around and you think, well, if I came back here in 5 years or 10 years, what do I want? Do I want that little mom and pop shop to still be here if I brought my kids back in 10 years? Yeah. So that's where I'm going to buy my coffee,
Right.
And little things make a huge difference.
Well, and I think that's kind of one of the biggest questions that I've had just mulling about in my brain recently is there are like two differing opinions of one is like, do we sequester tourists and visitors into their own little like tourist vicinity? Do we make this Disneyland for everybody so that way we can be like, okay, here you go, be a hot mess, go over here, don't touch us, don't look at us, we don't want to deal with you, just give us your money, give us your hotel tax, do all this stuff and make us employed, but like don't come near us at all? Or do you have that kind of like outlook that's saying, okay, we even know that like short-term rentals aren't great for the housing market as they are now, because they're not regulated. Could you disperse tourists and kind of put them out into different areas? So again, as a tourist, you could actually learn more and have more cultural exchanges all the time. And I don't think that there's a yes or no answer to that. And I think it definitely is going to differ on every single different destination. There's a difference in going to Orlando and there's a difference in going to Disney World, like there's going to be two different differences. So I think that each kind of like place that has its own destination marketing organization needs to have those in-depth research on their locals and their perspectives, and not just locals that own, coffee shops or bars or restaurants or hotels, like actual people who have to interact and actual people who are going to be out playing the trumpet on the street, normal people need to be interviewed and researched. And then you create this 5 to 10 year plans, because that's the thing is like, without that, then it's just going to kind of breed on its own. And unregulated, there's a great, I kind of forgot it, but like loosely termed is like tourism is like a fire, and it can either be, a well-controlled bonfire or it can be a forest fire. So it's kind of like, what do you want?
Right. That. Yes. What you said. Okay, we have a couple other questions. Kate has a question about your writing process. Do you have any tips or tricks for tapping into your creative side, and how do you start your writing process?
That is a dramatic answer, but I think the best is Hemingway, who said it, is that you just sit down at the typewriter and you bleed. Like, it's just, if you're not getting, and like even Stephen King said it in his book, if you don't sit down like every single day at the same time, the same amount of time, it doesn't matter. Like, you just have to put, Anne Lamott, everyone says it. It's like, you are not special at all. You literally just have to sit down and do it. And there's going to be, I deal with it all the time. There's going to be 1,000 different things that you want to do. And there's going to be 1,000 different, voices in your head that says, oh, I want to work on this project, or I want to work on this, or I want to go fold laundry or do whatever. But like, you literally have to sit down and go tunnel vision and then just start writing. And then you throw out like 80% of what you write anyway. So it is what it is.
I've heard multiple authors say, first of all, the exact same thing. Just write.
Yeah.
But also when that feels like you can't, like there's laundry and there's different things that have to be done. Even if you set a timer, you've got 15 minutes, you've got a half hour, start with what you've got, and you can work your way up to a bigger, longer amount of time. But just sit there with the timer and you've got 20 minutes, just do nothing but type for 20 minutes or write longhand or whatever for 20 minutes. And when the timer goes off, if that's all the time you got, cool. You got your writing time in today. Go do your laundry, go do your life, come back and they do it again tomorrow and do it again the next day.
Yeah, I definitely have to do the longhand for a majority. Like, until I actually start writing the book and I have a clear direction, then I can actually go into a computer. But every morning I basically go out on my front porch and put my phone inside. Because that's just when I'm a morning person. So my brain starts to wake up. And if I have my phone, I started to realize that like, I'll all of a sudden like look up something or like make a reminder or like check my calendar and like do all these things. And so I just try to leave every piece of technology out. I write longhand. and then the rest kind of goes from there.
Yeah, if I'm writing or trying to get some sort of project done, especially creative, especially if it's optional. It's optional. If someone else is like, you have to have this done by noon, I can do that. I could be on deadline, on task. But if it's optional, I can't
It's very
touch
hard.
my phone, I can't touch an iPad, I can't touch, and I a lot of times will write. I'll turn my Wi-Fi off. I'll open my word processing program on my computer and I'll turn the Wi-Fi off, because then I can't just click a Facebook. There's no notifications showing up, nothing. Because the same reason, you get distracted and then your 20 minutes, if you really only have that 20 minutes,
then
it's gone.
that. Yeah,
exactly. All right, we have a couple more questions. We're getting close to 6 o'clock, but we'll see if we can get all these questions.
Let's do it.
Kyle asked, have you ever had experienced any paranormal activity in New Orleans?
Surprisingly, not in New Orleans. I'm not saying I definitely believe in ghosts. I definitely feel like I've had ghost experiences, but never in New Orleans.
Well, where? Follow up.
I think mine happened when I was in college, and there was, this one where I live, there was this one ghost that everyone talked about and everyone knew existed. And I definitely saw her once through the window, and she turned the water in the shower cold on me. So
there you go.
Yeah.
All right. I love those things. I mean, I won't say it's for sure a ghost, but I'm saying something weird happened.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it was. So, like, I have quite a few of those. I was like, okay, you're not into it. That's all right. That's fine. But this happened.
Yeah, I think it was like much more like normal and natural in New Orleans. Like if something weird happened, there was still like a little box that I could just go and put that in and be like, nah, that's not a ghost. That's this. That's New Orleans. That's whatever. So yeah.
Good. So let's see. Another question from Kyle. What's your favorite country besides America?
That's actually a great question, Kyle. Honestly, even when I travel within the United States, I really love coming home to New Orleans. And so when I travel outside of the United States, I really enjoy coming home. It's not that just things are convenient or that they're normal or whatever. I appreciate countries for what they are. And when I typically travel for like a long period of time, like 2 to 3 weeks or more. And so I think always by the end of it, I just kind of get fed up with their way of living. Like even when my wife and I were traveling around Spain and we spent like 3 weeks in Spain, by the end of it, our last night, we actually went to a Thai restaurant just to eat some spicy, hot food that we didn't have to share with each other. We were like, please go on the other side of the table. I'm going to eat my food. You're going to eat your food. And we're not going to share anything. It's not going to be dried copa or whatnot. Like it's going to be like our own food. So, I mean, and honestly, like when you go around to different countries, again, there's pros and cons everywhere. There's pros and cons to the healthcare system in France. There's pros and cons in the UK, and there's pros and cons in America. But when you come home, it's like, yeah, like we've made this. Like I'm here because I'm voting and I'm making this. And so it's like mine. So again, America will always probably be my favorite country.
That is a great answer. I'm a big traveler too. I travel all over the place. I love traveling. The idea, if I talked about picking someone up at the airport, I will go in to pick you up because I like being in the airport. I'm like, oh my God, I'm living vicariously. I'm so close to travel. Like, I love it. But home, when you find that place that is home to you, it's nice.
Yeah, no, I mean, whenever you came back to the old airport and they had that huge Ochsner sign that says Louisiana #1 liver transplant, like say we're like, yeah, like that's okay. I'm home, Like that's great. But yeah,
were they thinking of the tourists when they made that? Like,
yeah, I honestly, I don't really see this as a huge medical destination, but I mean, maybe they were.
Maybe there's a whole market we don't know anything about. Maybe next time, if I know someone who needs a liver transplant, I'm like, hey, you can crash on my couch while you
while you get that liver rotated. Come on, get it in.
Exactly. All right, last question for the evening. What part of this book was most fun to write?
Well, it's funny for how many books I've read and like acknowledge like there's like sometimes a preface or an introduction and acknowledgments and stuff. And when I was writing this book, it's like I just forgot all of that. You know, it's like all of a sudden I like wrote it and I was like, here, world, read this. And then everyone, and then like my editor, thank God, was like, hey, do you want to like put some cushioning in the front and the end of it? Like you probably need.
You want to tell anybody what this is about or why they're reading this?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, yeah, that could be a good thing. So honestly, writing the introduction to where I had to get all of these crazy thoughts and data and experiences and ideas that I have onto paper and try to make it like digestible and relevant to anyone who's just going to pick it up and not have actually considered tourism at all in their life. That was just like a lot of fun for me. Because that like made me feel like a real writer. That was like, okay, cool. I'm like distilling a lot of information down into a couple of paragraphs. And then honestly, and still when I look back at the acknowledgements, I'm like, man, I could have like done so much better. Or, like there's so many more people that I could have acknowledged, like all this kind of stuff. But still at the same time, it still kind of made me feel good because I looked back and I was like, man, there's a lot of people who helped me, because writing is very solitary. And so it can feel very lonely and kind of like I was me against the world the whole time. And then when you go back and you read it and you're like, yeah, no, like I wasn't alone. There was definitely a lot of people helping me out along the way. So those are probably the best parts of the book to write.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
It was tons of fun. I love talking travel. I love talking like the tourism and New Orleans. They were some of my favorite things. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you. Yes, thank everyone for tuning in and everybody who commented. We appreciate that so much. You can get Leigh's book at Garden District Bookshop. I put the link in the comments. You can call us. You can stop by with the mask. We have it on our shelves right now. And thank you again. Have a good night.
Bye. Thank you.